Okay, so for today's topic, I want to talk about polarization, and I want to talk about conflict and what's happening out in the broader world and its impacts in our organization. So the first principle is that conflict, by its very nature, emotionally polarizes us, and frequently we're forced to take a side. And we often want to take a side. But the question is, then who looks after the whole? And so I want to start by getting us to think about this idea because um, political polarization, when we get polarized, we really fall into binary thinking. And binary thinking is like a biological, neurological default. It conserves energy. It's really easy for humans to do. And we have to actively work against our own neural mechanism, our wiring that wants to go into binary thinking. Okay. And political polarization out in the world around politics, global conflicts, war, all these different things really takes us to our defaults very easily. But then, as I said, the question becomes who looks after the whole? Now, being neutral for some people is the option. Okay, I'm not going to get polarized, I'm going to become neutral. But neutrality, as we also know, supports the status quo, and so therefore serves oppression. So being neutral is it's a nice intention, but it's somewhat misguided because in a conflict in which there's a bully and there's a victim, being neutral is not helpful in that situation. We're an unhelpful bystander giving permission for something to happen, as opposed to an upstander or someone who steps in. So, in that state, then, the thing I want you to think about is what it means to be non-polarized. And this is especially true if you're in a leadership position inside organizations. And that being non-polarized is an ability to hold multiple truths. And you have to have power awareness as a part of this. Now, um, what I want you to think about is that polarity, it's an either or. It's a binary. Okay. Um, and polarity management is learning to hold competing and opposite values and opposite views in order to find solutions to complex human problems. Okay. Uh, Most of the solutions that we're working on inside organizations and outside are not your typical ones that have one answer. 2 + 2 = 4. That's one answer. Okay. Where is X building in the city has one answer. Okay. But most of the problems we're working on as leaders inside organizations and outside organizations are complex problems and they don't have one solution, but our binary thinking pushes us into a simplistic way of being. Now, um, polarities are opposites or seeming opposites. And there's more than one right answer. But one of the things you want to know about polarities is that they are interdependent. And we're going to work on these to make it more concrete in a moment. And breathing is a great metaphor. Inhale, which is wonderful because it brings in oxygen, but you can't just hold oxygen. You have to let go of the waste, which is the carbon dioxide that builds up inside our systems. And so you exhale. So inhales and exhales seem like they're polarities, which they are, but you've got to go from one to the other. Without it, we die. It is a it is a process in which we go back and forth. Now, that is not my metaphor. That metaphor is by Barry Johnson, and he is someone who's really developed this work around polarity management. Now, before I get into an actual example, I want to hear from you. Why are you here? What brings you to this workshop, to this cafe? I'm curious because there's a wide number of reasons and challenges and issues that we face. I'd love to hear from some of you as to what's bringing you here? What are the challenges you're seeing around polarization? So I'd love to, if I'd like to hear at least a couple of voices. Tell me, what is it about this theme that's made you be here? What's the challenges you're facing? What are you noticing? Love to hear a couple of voices.
So I think for me, both me individually and sort of culturally, how I was raised to be very like conflict avoidant
Right,
and to avoid conflict at all costs. And so I find though that well, that's supposed to help us make things easier, quote unquote. I do spend a lot of time and energy trying to kind of like maintain the peace or kind of go through these very performative gestures. That
right,
energy I think could really be used to help address and solve problems. So
right.
that's something I'm trying to work through.
Okay, great, great. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in? What is about the theme? What's the challenge? What are you noticing? I know there's lots in the chat, and I'm going to ask you, Rebecca, to give us a highlight of that in a moment, but I'd love to hear another voice.
I can jump in.
Please.
Um, Hi everyone. So I think so I work for a medical humanitarian organization. So right in the thick of these very polarized contexts. And then also a consideration. So, we in these contexts, we kind of see one side of things, predominantly one side of things. But within our staff makeup, which is very global, we have multiple perspectives. So managing that internally as a leader within the organization, managing those different perspectives when what we where we work is so challenging, very polarized.
Right,
Um, yeah.
right, right. Thank you. Thank you, Ruby. Appreciate that. Okay, Rebecca, give us a sense of what some of the other things that are showing up in our chat.
Yeah, so I'm seeing wanting to work against racism, wanting to avoid genocide apathy, recognizing the need to balance polarizing view as an EDI lead, and serving others with intention, finding ways in management roles to have conversations that are brave and courageous, but are also supportive. And that as a leader, wanting to be able to engage with folks without causing harm. Also, knowing that there's a lot of pain and wanting to see a path forward. And it feels currently like we're stuck in a bind when we don't acknowledge the possibility that many different things can be true.
Right. Hey, thank you. That's all really helpful. All right, so let's keep moving forward. Thanks for jumping in, everybody, with your stories. I'm gonna move us to an example, okay, that can help us because some of us like the goal in this work, I feel, especially as a leader, is I want to be able to work with the broadest spectrum of employees. I want to be able to work with the broadest spectrum of stakeholders. What that means is I've got to develop a lot of emotional, psychological, and political fluidity. And that's fluidity does not mean lack of taking a stand on something. But what I'm talking about fluidity is how can I work with and respond to people, different people with different needs? How can I also still stand up for justice, but also be in relationship with people? Uh, and so that requires discernment. When are you soft? When are you boundaried? When are you assertive? When can you be a bit more in the middle, be in more listening rather than speaking mode? How do we do all these different things? And there's not one answer to this. I will, however, say that developing the flexibility, the fluidity, and the agility to move from one to the other can make us more effective. So let's, in doing that, there are certain things that I know how to do, but I don't know how to teach. So I've been looking for strategies, and one of the things that I found useful with the Barry Johnson work around polarity management, it gives us a tool to work with. So let's practice something on something that's a little bit lower cost before we go to something that's higher stakes. Okay, so I'm going to just jump in here. So we're going to talk about a concept, especially because, you know, if you come to Anima, you know that a lot of the work that we do is around racial justice and equity, EDI work. So we do a lot of this. So there's some tensions that are frequently held and that we need to have a conversation about. Um, um, One of the things you can do is you can move and you can shift into a non-binary state by a simple tactical tool is replace versus or but with an and. Okay, so I just want you to notice something, and this is just a little precursor into the work we're going to do in a moment. Okay, so I want you to just notice the following. So there's a list of words that I'm going to put here, and I just want you to take a moment and you can close your eyes from the screen for a minute, or blur your vision, or put your attention away. I just want you to notice what happens inside your body as I just make these subtle differences. Okay, so notice what happens when I say intent versus impact, intent and impact, fragility versus resilience, fragility and resilience, sameness versus difference, sameness and difference, hope versus despair, hope and despair, liberals versus conservatives, liberals and conservatives. Pause. Just take a moment. What did you notice happening inside your body, if anything at all, um, when we just did that subtle shift of just replacing that one word with an and? What did you notice? Anything? You can write something in the chat. I can hear a voice. Take a moment, write something in the chat. What did you notice in the difference between um, we just did that one little micro exercise? What did you notice that happened inside your body? Okay. It felt softer, more expansive, and opening. Um, Hope and despair made me teary, easier to breathe, looser, less tension. Okay. And captures a feeling that's closer to the range of feelings and emotions we realistically go through. Goosebumps, almost like there's potential, increased calmness, more ease. Okay. So that's what's happening when we just slow down and notice. Okay. When we're working with people, we want to take those opportunities to slow down, but our language makes a difference. Showing up with language that's non-polarized helps. That doesn't take away from the tensions we're talking about. When we insert an and, something else happens. Okay. Now let's go to another step in the process. Okay. Now we're going to do an exercise, and we're going to do it collectively. Okay. And we're going to pick a topic that is, you know, important. And we'll have some feelings around it. Okay, we're going to talk about because of the work that we do around racial justice and equity and so on. There's often a tension between when we focus on unity versus when we focus on our differences. And I'm just going to do a simple exercise with you. Okay. Um, because these tensions frequently exist in the field, especially if you're doing EDI work. Okay, so I'm going to ask you two simple questions, and they're going to be focused on benefits and drawbacks, but we will write each of these into the chat, and I'd like to hear from you. Okay, we're going to look at each of these first separately and then together. Okay, we're going to focus on unity first, and the contrast is diversity, so it's unity and diversity, but we're going to focus on unity first, which is focusing on similarities. Now, without any kind of bias and just really being open, what are the benefits when we focus on our similarities? Take a moment to think about that. What are the benefits of focusing on our similarities? I feel my unity reflex shows up every time there's like the Olympics. Even though I don't pay attention to the Olympics or anything beforehand, my unity reflex shows up when my people are doing something. I don't know what ice dancing is, but I'm really excited about ice dancing because my people are, in the finals. I'm going to find out what ice dancing is because I'm so excited that my people are in the finals, right? That kind of thing. So, uh, you know, there's benefits, okay? And what we're seeing is a sense of belonging, increased camaraderie, relatedness, togetherness, maintains openness, connecting on a human level, find common ground, easier and faster to move together, common language, establishing connection, stronger, supportive, unique, human connection, all these good things. Okay, great, good. Now, let's focus for a moment on um, the what would happen, and we're going to stick with unity for a moment. What are the drawbacks if we have a singular focus on our similarities? If we're focusing just on our similarities, what are drawbacks? Okay. All right. Lots of great stuff coming through. Okay. Everything from echo chambers, confirmation bias, othering, flattening identities, erasing differences, exclusion to those who don't fit in, um, no room for growth, erasure of uniqueness, maybe divisive, toxic positivity, groupthink, narrowing of views, color blindness. We don't recognize the experiences or gaslight other experiences, loss of voice, maintain of sameness, equity gaps, and so on. Okay, great. Now, let's go to focusing on diversity, which is really focusing on our differences. What's the benefits of focusing on our differences? So now we're going to the benefits again. What's the benefits of focusing on our differences? Okay. Lots of good responses coming in. Okay. Um, the benefits of focusing on our differences, everyone feels fully seen, giving voices to diversity, innovation, multiple perspectives, curiosity, new learning, complexity of identities, implementing unique ideas, self-determination, highlighting of potential, macro thinking, resilient systems, authentic, give space for multiple voices, learning opportunities, collaboration, growing, learning from one another. I would also add things like, you know, validation of the experience of marginalized people, right? We bring that in. Excluded, historically excluded groups. We get to learn a history we didn't know. Okay, so those are all benefits, right? And more. All right. Now, what about the drawbacks if we have a singular focus on our differences? Okay. Power struggles, polarization, conflict, tokenizing, fear, differences becoming too large to overcome, disconnected, divisiveness, othering, no room for compromise, no connection, um, hard to come to agreement, hard to connect. We might not change anything, insular, distrust. We get stuck, defensive, animosity, hostility, saviorism. We can also get to, especially when we're dealing with racial justice and equity work, you can get to identity essentialism, right? We're only defined by our identities. We're nothing more than our identities. We can never be, right? That happens as well. Okay. Now, Rebecca, I know you've been sort of crafting these things and trying to summarize some of them into a bit of a chart. Do you have a starting point for us to look at?
Yeah, so I have just noted some of these downs for noted some of this down for both diversity and unity. And I'm just going to show it to you in terms of like the benefits of both and the drawbacks of both, if that works.
Please do.
So
Okay.
check, can folks see that
Yeah, if you could increase that just a little. Oh, I know you got, yeah, there you go. Perfect.
better?
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Um, so the benefits you can see here of each one, and then the drawbacks you can see. It's just a bit of a summary. I know there's more. We didn't capture everything and everybody, but it's a pretty good list. Now, when you look at this, when you look at these lists, and Rebecca, you can kind of, go back and forth, give a little space with each time.
I'll
What?
pop this in for folks after.
Thank you. That's great. Um, I want you to now check in with yourself. Which do you gravitate towards? Which one is easier for you to access? Which one's harder for you to access? There's no judgment, there's just awareness. Which is easier? Which is harder for you? What do you notice? Was one even a little activating? Again, no judgment, just awareness. Just notice that. In an ideal world, we're able to go from one to another, to be able to know what each situation needs. Does it need us to focus on unity? Does it need us to focus on our differences? Okay. I want you to think about situations in which, yeah, it's really important to focus on our differences. Which ones are, when is it important to focus on our unity? Which one do you go towards? Which one is more of the default in your context, in your organization? Which one do we go towards? Where's the bias in your organization when it comes to a particular view around unity versus differences? So thank you, Rebecca. If you can just drop that. All right, I'm going to pause there for folks. What did you notice as we went through that exercise? What did you learn as we went through that exercise of one to the other? Which one's easier for you? Which one's harder? Which one's more alive in your organizational or cultural context? Come on, friends, jump in.
I can jump in. I definitely noticed that I think organizationally we tend to lean towards unity. Thinking while we try to strive for diversity, I think that's I think strive is the word I think I'm thinking of. Like we're always aiming for it, but a default, at least I'll speak for myself, that I think I definitely lean towards unity, like as a default. And it's harder and more work, obviously, to lean towards diversity for me.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your honesty with that. Other folks, what did you notice?
I can share. I find that I kind of fluctuate back and forth depending on the situation at hand and where I'm at. Meaning that if I'm amongst people of my own religious background or culture, I might be more intentionally diverse to create some challenges. Whereas if I'm in a diverse group setting, I might try to be more in a unity setting, depending what the situation is at hand. So I kind of fluctuate back and forth.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Ollie. Other folks, what'd you notice?
I'll just say, I was thinking a lot about that, that polarization represents, multiple truths that are interconnected, and thinking of the metaphor of breeding, that, the drawbacks and benefits of each kind of canceled each other out for me. They addressed each other. So if you're looking at a singular focus on, diversity, maybe one of the drawbacks is people don't feel as connected to each other. And then with the benefit of focusing on unity is that they do. So I was thinking a lot about that, trying to kind of match each of these things up that way.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Ellie, go ahead.
Thank you. Someone in the group chat mentioned that it can depend on the context for them, and like if they feel like they have power in a situation, they can feel more grounded and comfortable. And I just really resonate with that. Like I am here because I'm a new manager at a nonprofit, and I'm really trying to navigate as a person coming into this workplace. There's a lot of different ages, different people from different backgrounds, and I'm trying to kind of navigate unity, but also while respecting the diversity, and like trying to find my place in terms of like who do I call out, when do I call them out, or more I'm trying to lean on calling them in, actually, which is something that I learned from a DEI trainer online, that calling people in is often more helpful than calling them out, because it's like more of a learning experience. So I try to lean towards unity, but while also appreciating and respecting that can sometimes cause polarization in itself, because sometimes you're trying so hard to make things unifying that you can come off as neutral or uncaring. So I think I'm just kind of saying that's what I'm kind of struggling with, and I see the benefits in unity, but I also appreciate that sometimes it's not unifying for everyone, if that makes sense.
Right, absolutely, for sure, no doubt. I see Jennifer's hand, and then Therese.
When you mentioned stand up for justice and be in relationship, I feel like that really resonated for me. I find that I appreciate difference. That's where I gravitate to. But right now, when people on our team say like, differences of opinion are great, or it's good, or conflict is necessary, or these sort of phrases to hold that space, it's not in a space of justice. So the differences are actually sexism or racism, or like being said in ways that are holding power over people. And so then I get very frustrated, because I'm like, that's not about difference, like that's sexism or misogyny, and people won't make space for those conversations. And like, I'm perfectly happy to have conversations about differences and complex narratives and all of those things, but in a way that is not harming people on our team as we're doing it. And so then now we have this just deep tension where you kind of like hold your breath in the meeting, where you're like, are we going to make it through without somebody, anyhow. So that's my question right now, is like and also I'm like, I haven't dealt with that in a while in my workplace, where I'm like, does nobody else want to talk about the fact that this is happening? So it feels kind of exhausting to me.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, let's be clear, most organizations, um, given where they are on their equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging journeys, that there's an unstated focus on unity on team, as opposed to being able to talk about differences. So most organizations are not in a place where that's the case. And Jennifer, you may also find helpful the conversation about not holding your breath about who's going to say what. You may also find helpful the conversation we had in September, and go back to the session on the limits of psychological safety, where we also distinguish psychological safety from safe space. And there's a really rich conversation with that. So I just want to put that out there as well. Therese and then Chelsea. Oh, we can't hear you, Therese.
Hi, thank you. I was wanting to talk a bit about what Jennifer was saying as well around at what point do you boundary it? As you mentioned earlier, Shakil, you said something about boundaries versus allowing just that free expression. What I came from, my background is mediation and working in human rights agencies as a mediator in human rights conflict. So like between individuals, not organizations necessarily, but we're in conflict, and we used to use this tactic of moving from positions to interests.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a really useful skill. And even though the interests didn't align, people could relate to interests more than they could. So still maintaining boundaries around psychological safety and challenging things that are sexist, harmful, racist in the moment. Also trying to move beyond those positions to the underlying interests sometimes help. But I wanted to get your perspective on that, Shakil, because I'm not sure if that erases differences or if that kind of is too much of a focus on unity versus diversity. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, like I said, there's not one answer because it's so context. In which, like in some contexts, it will be erasing.
Yeah.
In other contexts, it won't. For me, around the idea of discernment and the fluidity is knowing what tools to use where. Do I have the discernment to go, actually, I would never use that strategy over there, but I'm definitely going to invite it here because it's necessary and needed. Frequently, our polarized perspectives, and even how we do justice work can be very polarizing. There's ways in which we've got universal answers to everything. Well, universal answers to everything don't work in every situation. It's very context specific. And so I don't have one answer. It would be yes and, or no and then we'd have to get more into the specifics of the actual case. Chelsea, I think I saw your hand, Chelsea, just a moment ago.
Yeah, so I just wanted to touch on, I think I put in the chat that my organization leaned towards unity, but is taking more of a diversity approach. And I just wanted to bring some context to that. I think our organization is in a small community, and I think we do try to have unity within the organization. But we did a survey about a year ago where we evaluated everyone in the organization's psychological safety. And what that survey told us was that our racialized staff were not having the same experience as our dominant white staff. So I think it is a balancing act between those things, because we do want unity, but we don't want to leave people behind in that unity. And we have to be willing to look at it from different perspectives so that we don't leave people behind in that.
I appreciate you bringing up data in that, because that is one of the core ways we can find out how well we're doing. And psychological safety is really important. And you know, you being able to measure and ask your staff in a way that is also anonymous and psychologically safe how well they feel like they're doing in the space is so important. And it won't be unusual to find differences amongst different groups, although some organizations just tend to have lower psychological safety anyway. It's one of the things that is challenging because we don't actually know how to, most leaders don't know how to create psychologically safe space. Saying it doesn't create it. And there's that was the focus for our September, and I gave some tips about what to do with that. But absolutely, different groups will have different experiences. And on that note, I know that I found Shavana, I saw your comment. I'd love if you could speak to it a little bit, if that's okay, if Shavana's still on the call.
Hi, yes, I am. I've just been thinking a lot. I really appreciate that exercise because it's never been framed for me in that way with just like a quick demonstration. But when I think about, obviously, my lived experience, I identify as a Black queer woman, and in that space, I think it's already interesting to occupy just generally. And I'm in a predominantly white institution, and I'm in Wisconsin with an a really interesting sociopolitical context right now. And when I think about my organization, I think there's so many ways in which we are leaning into this idea of unity, or where we have leaders who are really speaking to thinking about like, well, what are the things that we have in common, and how can we talk about the ways in which, we have shared goals and things like that. And I think that's really, really important. And there's often this discounting, or this cognitive dissonance of, we really want to diversify our staff and really have the representation that mirrors our Wisconsin constituents. And I think that's wonderful. And when it comes down to it, I think there's this approach to, for example, in hiring, hiring for difference and onboarding for sameness, and expecting people to, only showcase certain parts of themselves, whether that's explicitly or implicitly within our systems. And so it's so hard when I think about, part of my role is, thinking about workforce development and really tapping into how are folks experiencing our system, and what are we doing as an employer to better serve them. And the reality is, I think we're often boiling things down to, we're saying we want to experience and create an organizational culture that is more expansive. But at the same time, there are so many ways in which we're telling people that can only work if you show up in this way. And it's a really, really hard polarity to hold. And I think it's especially hard for racialized individuals, and particularly in my case as a Black woman, because there are so few of us, and so few of us in leadership roles, especially that, for lack of a better word, burden becomes pretty hard to navigate. And knowing that it's not only my job, but when we have these formalized roles and titles in the DEI space, it's really a challenge to be able to say and to continue to hold those expectations that this is everyone's job to create the workplace that we want to see.
Right. That's right. I feel like you summarized it in that very pithy quote where you said, we hire for difference, but we onboard for sameness. I feel like that just really captured it so well. And yes, this is one of the tensions most organizations don't even realize, because they haven't done very much work. They're in the early stages of their work around equity, diversity, inclusion, and differences, that they don't even realize how polarized they are towards sameness. And that excludes all kinds of people. And when it's unconscious and hidden, it becomes even harder. In this particular focus, there's a number of things that leaders have to be able to do. And one of them is an awareness of your context, awareness of power dynamics, awareness of how systemic forms of discrimination play out. If you don't have those skills, if leaders don't have those skills, then you're almost defaulting towards a binary approach. All right, so we don't have time to do this now, I'm realizing, but I wanted to go from that to this. And actually, if people want to hang around for a little bit after this session, this is where the next practice goes. Okay, so we go from something like this to then when world events spill into our organizations. Okay, so we know over the last year, Israel and Palestine, although it's ongoing for those of us who are following these issues, it really once again hit this moment of massive influx because of the tragedy around October 7th. And so now it's in our workplaces. So how do we talk about it? Well, the first thing you've got to be able to do is do it with yourself. Like, where are you in this? So a practice here is going through and doing this kind of chart for yourself, and with a small group of trusted people. It's a really good exercise to do, you know, and you do it so that you know where you are for yourself. Can you go through and highlight the benefits of focusing on the impacts of the current crisis, as well as the historical crisis, on Jewish people? What's the benefits of that? Okay. Can you focus on the benefits of focusing on the impacts of Palestinian and Arab peoples that are affected? Can you do that? And then can you go to the other side? Can you go to talking about the drawbacks of a singular focus on the impacts on Jewish people? What are the drawbacks when we do that? And what are the drawbacks of a singular focus on the impacts on Palestinian and Arab people? Now, in doing this, we're not trying to erase differences. We're not trying to make everything equal. As soon as you put something in two charts like this, you're almost unconsciously moving towards polarized place. However, this is an exploration. How far can you get in the exploration? Where is your default when you go in this? What's easier for you to grasp? What's harder? What's easier for your team to tend towards? What's harder? Where are your gaps? It's frequently within the gaps that we need to be able to fill, to be able to move into a greater state of being non-polarized. When we are leading, when we are trying to work with a broad spectrum of people, when we are trying to work with the broadest spectrum of employees or leaders. Okay, so if people want to stay around afterwards, I'm happy to do this for whichever group wants to stay around after the session, but I know we got to close up at 1. So here's some tips. Here's some things, because again, this is not complete. This is not the end all and be all. This is a starting point, because to be in a state of moving and having the psychological and emotional and the political fluidity to be able to go from one thing to another, to be able to work with the different needs from one to another, that's an ongoing journey. So this is just a starting point to get you started. So the key to this work, to all work around leadership, is self-awareness. Okay, and how we develop that self-awareness, especially on polarized topics, is your willingness to receive feedback. And as we talked about in the last session on psychological safety, remember, psychologically safe space is a place where people can question, can challenge, can raise issues, can say things that are unpopular, but do that without leaders or their peers sanctioning them somehow, punishing them somehow, some kind of consequence. So can you take feedback without consequence? Develop empathy and perspective taking skills. That's also important, to be able to go from one side to another. Can you take these different perspectives? Where are your gaps? Really important. Okay. Now, your gaps, frequently, gaps happen around identity awareness issues. People might be really comfortable on certain issues. A lot of white women, for example, are very comfortable around gender, but not so much around race. Lots of able-bodied people are, very open to issues around LGBTQ2S+ community members. heterosexism, homophobia, but really terrible at really thinking about ability issues. So where's your gaps? Okay. Your understanding of historical and political context matters. These are things that we can build. Step 4, then actually practicing the polarity management, moving from one to another. Doing this, what are the benefits? What happens when we overemphasize one perspective? What's the benefits of this other perspective? What happens when we overemphasize that? And where are we as an organization? So practicing polarity management is really important. And lastly, committing through the awkward stage. Organizations will go through an awkward stage when they're trying something new. They will go up and then dip down quickly on the other side. That's part of the awkward stage. Commit through it, right? We're not going to be perfect. It's just going to work that way. Individuals also do the same thing. We start, we're clumsy, we overdo stuff, we underdo stuff. That's all part of the learning process. Okay, so really want you to think about that. There were some tips to get you started thinking about how to be a non-polarized leader. But I want to just close by saying this is not complete. We are not complete. An hour is not enough to do this, but it gets us started, and your willingness to step into this conversation is so important. You don't have to be perfect. When we have issues in our workplace and we say the wrong thing, we can come back and take responsibility for it. We can apologize. We can say, hey, we're all learning here, people. That didn't go so well, but we're going to try this other thing. So I just want you to also show that grace to yourself, be in that process together, and also recognize that this is new work we're doing as organizational leaders. This is challenging work, and so appreciate you willing to be here. Let's come off mute and say goodbye to everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time when we talk about a post-truth world and how we're going to navigate that as leaders.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Goodbye, everyone.